There is one chapter in the Bible that reads like nothing else in Scripture. It is not a prayer. It is not a prophecy. It is not a parable or a commandment or a song. It reads like a courtroom testimony, like someone took the witness stand, opened a scroll, and began calling names one after another, presenting evidence for something that cannot be seen, touched, weighed, or measured. The chapter is Hebrews 11, and the evidence it presents is for the most controversial claim in all of human existence, that there is a God you cannot see, a world you cannot touch, and a promise that will not be fulfilled in your lifetime, and that betting your entire life on those things is the only rational thing a human being can do. 40 verses, at least 18 names, thousands of years of human history compressed into a single argument. And when you reach the final verse, you discover something that changes the meaning of every story that came before it. A twist so devastating and so beautiful that the early church fathers called this chapter the courtroom of heaven. But here is what almost nobody notices. The people in this chapter are not saints. They are liars, cowards, murderers, prostitutes, and doubters, every single one of them. And that is not a flaw in the argument. That is the argument. Let me show you what I mean. Before we walk through the names, you need to understand what Hebrews 11 is actually doing. Because if you read it as a list of Bible heroes, you will miss the entire point. The book of Hebrews was written to Jewish Christians who were on the verge of giving up. They had believed in Jesus. They had left the synagogue. They had been persecuted, robbed, publicly humiliated. Some had their property seized. Others had been thrown in prison. And now, years later, Jesus had not returned. The temple was still standing. The Romans were still in charge. The same pagan empire that crucified their Messiah was still ruling the known world. And the pressure to go back to Judaism, back to the safety of the old system, back to a faith that at least had the protection of Roman law, was crushing them. The author of Hebrews is writing to people who are losing their faith. And in chapter 11, he does something brilliant. He does not give them theology. He does not give them rules. He gives them evidence. He puts faith itself on trial and calls witnesses. And the first word of his testimony is a definition that has been debated for 2,000 years. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11, verse 1. That word substance in Greek is hypostasis. It means foundation, reality, the underlying support of something. And the word evidence is elegchos, a legal term meaning proof, conviction, the kind of evidence you bring to court. Not a feeling, not a vibe, a legal term. The author chose his words like a lawyer preparing a case. He is not saying faith is wishful thinking or positive energy or blind trust. He is saying faith is a foundation you build your life on and evidence you would stake your life on. And then he spends the rest of the chapter proving it by calling witnesses who did exactly that. The first name he calls is Abel. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. Abel is the first human being in history to die, and he died because he worshipped correctly. His brother Cain brought an offering. God rejected it. Cain burned with jealousy, and he murdered Abel in a field. The first act of worship in human history led directly to the first murder in human history. The very first person who tried to approach God the right way was killed for it by someone who did not. And the author of Hebrews says Abel still speaks. A dead man, thousands of years in the ground, is still testifying. His blood still cries out from the earth, just as Genesis 4 tells us. Abel's faith outlasted his body. That is the first piece of evidence. But here is the uncomfortable part. Abel's faith did not save his life. It got him killed. He did everything right, and he was rewarded with a violent death. If you are a Jewish Christian in the 1st century, losing everything for your faith, that is not exactly encouraging. Unless the author is making a different point entirely. Unless he is saying that the measure of faith is not whether it protects you from suffering, but whether it outlasts your suffering. Abel's body is dust. His faith is still talking. The second witness is Enoch. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him. Enoch is the opposite of Abel. Abel died for his faith. Enoch never died at all. Genesis 5 records it with one of the strangest lines in the entire Old Testament. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That is it. No fanfare, no burning chariot like Elijah would later receive. Just a man who walked so closely with God that one day he simply was not there anymore. And sandwiched inside Enoch's story, the author drops what might be the most important verse in the entire chapter. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Not hard, not unlikely, but genuinely impossible. You cannot have a relationship with God without faith. That is the foundation everything else in this chapter is built on. But notice what the author does here. Abel dies. Enoch does not die. The first two witnesses have completely opposite outcomes, and both are held up as examples of faith, which means faith does not guarantee a specific result. It guarantees a relationship with God. What happens to your body is a separate question entirely. That distinction will matter more and more as the chapter goes on. The third witness is Noah. By faith Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. Noah believed something that was literally insane by the standards of his time. God told him water was going to fall from the sky, cover the earth, and destroy every living thing. According to many scholars, there is a credible case that the pre-flood world had never experienced rainfall in the way we understand it. Genesis 2 describes a mist that watered the ground. Noah was building a massive boat, roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall, in a world that may have never seen a storm. Imagine the ridicule. Years of construction, decades possibly. His neighbors watching him cut wood, saw planks, seal every joint with pitch. For a disaster that showed no signs of coming, the sky was clear, the ground was dry, and Noah kept building, day after day, year after year. He staked his family's survival on a warning from a God nobody else could hear. And then it rained. Noah's faith was not passive. It involved physical, back-breaking labor over an extended period of time with zero visible evidence that he was right. That is a kind of faith that most people never consider when they talk about believing in God. It is one thing to say you believe God exists. It is another thing entirely to spend decades of your life building something because of what he told you in private, while every person around you thinks you have lost your mind. And then the chapter shifts, because the next witness changes the scale of everything. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out, not knowing where he was going. Abraham gets more space in Hebrews 11 than anyone else. 5 full verses devoted to him, plus additional verses for Sarah, and for good reason. Abraham is the hinge of the entire chapter. Everything before him is prologue. Everything after him flows from the covenant God made with him. But the detail the author highlights is not the covenant, it is the ignorance. Abraham went out, not knowing where he was going. God said, "Leave." Abraham said, "Where?" God said, "I will tell you when you get there." That is insane by any rational standard. You do not leave your home, your family, your entire life behind to follow a voice to an unnamed destination. Abraham was 75 years old. He lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, one of the most advanced cities of the ancient world. He had wealth, comfort, stability, and God said, "Walk away from all of it. I have something better for you, but I am not going to tell you what it is or where it is until you start moving." And Abraham went. He packed up everything, took his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot, and walked into the desert toward a land he had never seen, following a promise from a God he had only recently come to know. And when he arrived, he did not receive the land. He lived in tents. The author of Hebrews says this explicitly. He lived in the land of promise, as in a foreign country. He was a stranger in the place God had promised him. He could see the land. He could walk on the land. But it was not his. The promise was real. The fulfillment was not yet. And Abraham lived with that tension for the rest of his life. This is the pattern the author is building. Faith means acting on a promise that has not been fulfilled yet. Not a promise that will never be fulfilled. A promise that will not be fulfilled on your timeline. God also promised Abraham a son, and then he made Abraham wait 25 years for it. Sarah was 90, Abraham was 100. By every biological standard, this was impossible. And yet God kept the promise dangling in front of them year after year, until the situation was so hopeless that when the child finally came, there could be no possible explanation except God. And then comes the moment that defines Abraham forever. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, the son he had waited 25 years for. The son through whom every promise God had ever made to Abraham was supposed to be fulfilled. And God said, "Kill him, put him on an altar, and burn him." The author of Hebrews reveals something here that Genesis does not make explicit. Abraham reasoned. He thought it through. He considered that if God had promised descendants through Isaac, and God was now asking him to kill Isaac, then there was only one logical conclusion. God would have to raise Isaac from the dead. Abraham invented the concept of resurrection in his own mind, centuries before anyone in Scripture would experience it. Not because he was a theologian, because faith forced him to a logical conclusion. If God's promise is true, and God is asking me to do something that appears to contradict that promise, then God must have a solution I cannot see yet. That is not blind faith. That is faith reasoning its way to an answer that does not yet exist in human experience. And God stopped him. The angel called out. A ram appeared in the thicket. Isaac lived. But the author of Hebrews says Abraham figuratively received Isaac back from the dead. In Abraham's mind, Isaac had already died. The sacrifice was complete in his heart. The 3 days they traveled to Mount Moriah, Abraham was walking with a son he had already surrendered. And the return of Isaac was, to Abraham, a resurrection. This is the midpoint of the chapter, and it is the key to everything. Because what Abraham experienced in shadow, God the Father experienced in reality. God did not stop the sacrifice of his own son. There was no angel. There was no ram in the thicket. Jesus went to the altar and did not come back down. And 3 days later, the resurrection Abraham had reasoned toward in faith became an actual historical event. The shadow became substance. The faith became sight. Every story in Hebrews 11 is pointing forward. Every act of faith is a shadow of the cross. And Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac is the clearest shadow of all. But the chapter does not stop with Abraham. It keeps calling witnesses. And this is where it starts getting uncomfortable. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Sarah, the woman who laughed in God's face when he said she would have a son. Genesis 18 records it plainly. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" She did not believe the promise. She laughed at it. And years before that, she had already tried to solve God's problem herself by giving her servant Hagar to Abraham, producing Ishmael, and creating a mess that still echoes through the Middle East today. And yet Hebrews 11 includes her in the Hall of Faith. Why? Because faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is what you do after you doubt. Sarah laughed, and then Sarah conceived. She moved from mockery to motherhood. Her doubt was real, but her faith was the final word. If you have ever doubted God, if you have ever laughed at a promise that seemed too good or too late, Sarah is your witness. She is proof that faith does not require perfection. It requires persistence. After Sarah, the chapter accelerates. Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. 3 generations covered in 3 verses. Each one blessed the next generation, passing the promise forward, even though none of them saw it fulfilled. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. Isaac, the man who was so blind and confused that he blessed the wrong son. Jacob tricked him with goat skin on his arms and a bowl of stew, and yet even that disaster is called faith. Because despite the deception, despite the chaos, the blessing landed exactly where God intended it. God's purpose moved forward through human failure, human blindness, and human trickery. That is a pattern worth remembering. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. Jacob, the liar, the manipulator, the man who spent his entire life scheming and grasping and wrestling for control. He cheated his brother. He deceived his father. He spent decades running from the consequences of his own cleverness. And at the very end, dying in Egypt, leaning on his staff because he no longer had the strength to stand, he finally bowed. He finally worshipped. His last act was not a scheme. It was surrender. A lifetime of struggle ending in a single moment of faith. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. Joseph's faith was about his bones, not his legacy in Egypt, not the fact that he had risen from slavery to become the second most important man in the ancient world, not the fact that he saved an entire civilization from famine. His dying request was about where his skeleton would rest. Take my bones out of Egypt when God brings you to the promised land. Joseph believed in a future he would only participate in as a corpse. His faith extended beyond his own death, beyond his own relevance. into a future he would never see with living eyes. And then comes Moses. And this is where the chapter catches fire. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. It starts with his parents. Pharaoh had ordered every Hebrew baby boy thrown into the Nile. Moses' parents looked at their son and made a decision that could have gotten their entire family executed. They hid him. For 3 months they concealed a crying, living infant from an empire that wanted him dead. Every knock on the door could have been the soldiers. Every neighbor could have been an informer. And still they hid him. And then, when they could hide him no longer, they put him in a basket sealed with pitch and placed him in the very river that was supposed to be his grave. They turned the instrument of death into a vehicle of salvation. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Moses walked away from the most advanced empire on earth. He had everything: wealth, status, education, comfort, safety, access to the finest food and clothing and architecture the ancient world could produce. He was royalty. He could have lived the rest of his life in a palace, surrounded by luxury, and no one would have blamed him. The Hebrews were slaves making bricks in the mud. Moses was a prince eating off gold. The gap between those two worlds was enormous, and he chose the slaves. He looked at the gold and the comfort and the ease, and he walked away from all of it because he believed in something he could not see. The author of Hebrews adds a detail that stops you cold. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt. Moses saw Christ, not literally, not physically, but through faith. He understood that suffering for God's purpose was worth more than everything Egypt could offer. 1,500 years before Jesus was born, Moses was already counting the cost and choosing the cross. But here comes the part of Moses' story that nobody preaches about. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Moses left Egypt twice. The first time, he fled after killing an Egyptian in a fit of rage. He was scared for his life. He ran to the desert and spent 40 years herding sheep. 40 years, from prince to shepherd, from the palace of Pharaoh to the backside of a desert with nothing but sand and goats and silence. And it was in that silence, at the burning bush, that God finally called him. But Moses argued. He begged God to send someone else. He said he could not speak well enough. He said the people would not believe him. He said he was not the right person. Exodus chapters 3 and 4 are a long, painful negotiation between God and a man who does not want the job. And then he went anyway. The author of Hebrews says he was not afraid, but we know from Exodus that he was terrified. So what does Hebrews mean? It means the fear was real, but it was not the deciding factor. Moses felt the fear and went anyway because the God he could not see was more real to him than the Pharaoh he could. That is what the text means by endured as seeing him who is invisible. Moses lived as if the invisible God was standing right next to him. And, because he did, the visible Pharaoh lost his grip. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. The Passover, the night that changed everything. God told every Hebrew family to slaughter a lamb, paint its blood on the doorframe, and stay inside. Death was coming through Egypt. Every firstborn would die. But the angel would pass over every house marked with blood. Imagine being a Hebrew father that night. You have painted lamb's blood on your doorframe because a man named Moses told you God said to do it. Your family is inside. Your firstborn son is sleeping. And outside, in the darkness, something is moving through the streets of Egypt. You cannot see it. You cannot fight it. You cannot bargain with it. The only thing standing between your child and death is a smear of blood on wood. That is faith. Not understanding, not certainty, not comfort. Blood on wood, and the belief that it will be enough. And every Christian reading this should feel the shadow of another night. Another firstborn son. Another sacrifice of blood. Another piece of wood, this time shaped like a cross. The Passover of Exodus points directly to the cross of Calvary. The Lamb whose blood saved Israel from the angel of death points directly to the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. The blood on the doorframe and the blood on the cross are the same story told twice. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. The same sea, the same water. For Israel, it was a road. For Egypt, it was a grave. The difference was not the sea, the difference was faith. The same circumstances that deliver one person can destroy another, depending on whether they are walking in faith or chasing in pride. And then comes a name that should shock everyone who reads this chapter. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Rahab, a prostitute, a Canaanite, a pagan who worshipped false gods in a city that was about to be destroyed by the God of Israel. She had every reason to be on the wrong side of this story. She was the enemy by birth, by nationality, by religion, and by profession. She lived in Jericho, the first city standing between Israel and the Promised Land, and she was a sex worker, the lowest rung of society in virtually every ancient culture. And yet she is in the Hall of Faith, right next to Abraham, right next to Moses. Same list, same honor. Why? Because when 2 Israelite spies showed up at her door, she hid them. She lied to the soldiers who came looking for them. She lowered the spies out a window on a scarlet rope. She risked her life and the lives of her entire family for people she had just met, because she had heard about their God and she believed he was real. Listen to what she told the spies in Joshua chapter 2. I know that the Lord has given you the land. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. She had never seen a miracle. She had never read a scroll of Torah. She had never sat under the teaching of a prophet. She had only heard rumors, stories carried across the desert by traders and refugees about a God who parted seas and destroyed armies. And on the basis of second-hand information, she bet her life on the God of Israel. Rahab's faith was built on less evidence than anyone else in this chapter. Abraham heard God's voice directly. Moses saw the burning bush. Noah received detailed architectural instructions. Rahab heard a rumor, and she believed it so completely that she turned against her own people, her own city, her own king, to side with a God she had never met. And here is what happened next. When Jericho fell, every person inside the walls died except Rahab and her family. She married an Israelite named Salmon. Their son was Boaz. Boaz married Ruth. Their grandson was Jesse. Jesse's son was David. And from the line of David came Jesus Christ. A Canaanite prostitute is in the direct bloodline of the Messiah. That is not an accident. That is the author of Hebrews making a point so loud it echoes through the entire New Testament. Faith is not about where you come from, what you've done, or how deep your knowledge of God is. Faith is about who you trust when everything is on the line. After Rahab, the chapter shifts gears. The author seems to run out of time or space. He starts listing names without telling their full stories. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David, and Samuel, and the prophets. Look at those names. Really look at them. Gideon, the man who tested God twice with a fleece, because he could not bring himself to trust the promise without physical proof. When God told him to attack the Midianites, Gideon did not say yes. He said, "Prove it." So he put a fleece on the ground and asked God to make it wet while the ground stayed dry. God did it. And Gideon said, "Do it again," but reversed. Make the ground wet and the fleece dry. God did that too. 2 miracles demanded before Gideon would obey a single command. And then, when he finally agreed to fight, God stripped his army from 32,000 men down to 300. 300 men with torches and clay jars against an army that covered the valley like locusts. Gideon's faith was so fragile that God had to engineer a situation where the only explanation for victory was divine intervention. And yet Gideon is on this list. Barak, the general who refused to go into battle unless a woman named Deborah went with him. The commander of Israel's army looked at the Canaanite war chariots and said, "I will not go unless you come with me." And Deborah told him the consequence. She said, "I will go with you, but because of the way you are going about this, the honor will not be yours." The glory of the victory would go to a woman named Jael, who drove a tent peg through the enemy general's skull while he slept. Barak won the war, but lost the glory because he could not trust God without a human crutch beside him. And he is on this list. Samson, the man who broke every Nazirite vow he ever made, spent his life chasing Philistine women who betrayed him, gave up the secret of his supernatural strength to Delilah for the price of her affection, and only accomplished his greatest act of faith while blind, chained between 2 pillars, asking God for strength one final time so he could bring the temple of Dagon crashing down on himself and 3,000 Philistines. Samson's faith showed up only when everything else had been stripped away. His eyes, his freedom, his dignity, his hair, his strength, all gone. And in that absolute emptiness, with nothing left to rely on, he finally prayed. And God answered. Samson is on this list. Jephthah, who made a reckless, foolish vow to sacrifice whatever came out of his house first, if God gave him victory in battle. He won the battle, and his only daughter walked through the door, dancing, celebrating her father's victory. The text of Judges 11 is debated to this day whether Jephthah actually sacrificed her or devoted her to lifelong service. But either way, the vow was foolish, unnecessary, and born from a man who did not understand the God he was bargaining with. And Jephthah is on this list. These are not heroes, these are disasters. Deeply flawed, often foolish, sometimes genuinely terrible people who made catastrophic decisions and hurt the people closest to them. And every single one of them is in this chapter. The author of Hebrews put them in the same courtroom as Abraham and Moses and said their faith counts too. Why? Because the point was never that these people were impressive. The point was that God is faithful even when his people are not. The thread that runs through every name in Hebrews 11 is not human strength. It is divine patience. God kept working through liars, cowards, doubters, and failures, because his plan does not depend on human perfection. It depends on human trust, however small, however late, however imperfect that trust might be. And if God could work through Gideon's timidity, Samson's recklessness, Jacob's manipulation, and Rahab's past, then he can work through you. Whatever you think disqualifies you from God's story, someone in Hebrews 11 had it worse and still made the list. The author then describes what these people accomplished through faith. They conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of flames, escaped the edge of the sword. They became mighty in battle, routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Victory after victory, miracle after miracle. Faith producing results you can see, touch, and celebrate. This is the part of faith everyone wants. The lion's mouth shut, the flames quenched, the battle won, the dead child placed back in her mother's arms, breathing. And then the author does something that no one expects. He flips the entire chapter upside down. Others were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground. Sawed in two. That is believed to be a reference to the prophet Isaiah, who, according to Jewish tradition preserved in a text called the Martyrdom of Isaiah, was placed inside a hollow log and sawed apart by King Manasseh. Isaiah, the prophet who saw the coming of Christ more clearly than anyone in the Old Testament. The prophet who wrote about the suffering servant in chapter 53, the passage that describes the crucifixion hundreds of years before crucifixion was invented. And his reward for that faithfulness was being cut in half by a king who did not want to hear what God had to say. The author of Hebrews puts these unnamed, tortured, destitute people in the same chapter as Abraham and Moses. Same list, same faith, completely opposite outcomes. Abraham received a son, these people received a saw. Moses led a nation to freedom. These people wandered in caves wearing animal skins, with nothing and no one. Rahab survived the destruction of Jericho. These people did not survive anything, and the author says the world was not worthy of them. Not the other way around. The world was not worthy of them. The people who won battles and shut the mouths of lions are worthy of admiration. But the people who lost everything, who were tortured and killed and forgotten by history, they are the ones who receive the highest compliment in the entire chapter. The world did not deserve to have them in it. This is the moment the whole chapter snaps into focus, because the argument is not that faith gives you a good life. The argument is that faith connects you to a reality that transcends your life. Whether you conquer kingdoms or get sawed in two, faith is the same substance, the same evidence, the same hypostasis. The outcome does not define the faith defines the person. And then comes the final verse, the one that changes everything that came before it. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. They did not receive what was promised. Abel did not receive it. Enoch did not receive it. Abraham died in a tent on land that was not yet his. Sarah died without seeing her grandchildren become a nation. Moses died on a mountaintop, looking at a promised land he was not allowed to enter. Rahab died in Israel, but never saw the temple or the kingdom. David, Samuel, Isaiah, every single person in the Hall of Faith died without receiving the ultimate promise. They saw it from a distance. They believed it was coming. They staked their entire existence on it, and they died before it arrived. The promise was Christ. The fulfillment was the cross, the resurrection. The new covenant written not on stone tablets, but on human hearts. Everything the people in Hebrews 11 were waiting for came true, but it came true after they were gone. And the author says God did this on purpose. He provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. The heroes of faith cannot be made complete without us. Their story and our story are the same story. Their faith and our faith are connected across thousands of years by the same thread. They ran the first legs of the race. We are running the current leg, and none of us, not them and not us, will be complete until the race is finished. That is why Hebrews 12 verse 1, the very next verse after this chapter ends, says this: "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith." The witnesses from chapter 11 are watching. Abel is watching. Abraham is watching. Moses, Rahab, Sarah, the unnamed ones who were sawed in two and wandered in caves, they are all there. They ran their leg of the race without ever seeing the finish line, and now they stand in the cloud, waiting because they cannot be made perfect until we cross ours. And who are we supposed to look at while we run? Not Abraham, not Moses, not any human witness, no matter how faithful. We look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of faith, the one who started faith and the one who completes it. The one who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus is the final witness, the one who did not just act on faith, but who is faith made flesh. Every shadow in Hebrews 11 finds its substance in him. Abel's acceptable sacrifice points to the perfect sacrifice of the Lamb of God. Enoch, walking with God, points to the Son who is one with the Father. Noah's Ark points to salvation through judgment, the waters that destroyed the world becoming the waters of baptism. Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac points to the Father's actual sacrifice of his Son. Sarah's impossible pregnancy points to the virgin birth, another child that biology said could not exist. The Passover blood on the doorframe points to the blood of Christ on the cross. The Red Sea crossing points to passing from death to life. Rahab's scarlet cord hanging from her window points to the scarlet thread of redemption running from Genesis to Revelation. Every single story in this chapter is a pixel, and when you step back far enough, the pixels form a single image, the image of Jesus Christ. That is the secret code of Hebrews 11. It was never a list of heroes to admire. It was a legal case assembled across 4,000 years of human history, using liars and cowards and prostitutes and doubters as witnesses, proving one single point: that the God who is unseen is more real than anything you can touch, that the promise he makes will be kept even if you die before it arrives, that faith is not a feeling, not a wish, not a leap into darkness, but a foundation you can build on and evidence you can stake your life on, and that every act of faith, from the very first blood shed by Abel to the very last breath you will ever take, is connected to the cross of Jesus Christ and the empty tomb that followed. Abel offered a sacrifice. Christ became the sacrifice. Enoch walked with God. Christ is God walking with us. Noah built an ark. Christ became our ark. Abraham offered his son. God offered his son. Moses chose suffering over comfort. Christ embraced suffering unto death. The Passover lamb died so that others might live. The Lamb of God died so that all might live. The code runs through every verse. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And every Sunday school lesson that taught Hebrews 11 as a list of brave people missed the entire point. These people were not brave. They were terrified, confused, and deeply flawed. But they trusted a God they could not see, and that trust connected them to a story so much bigger than their own lives that 2,000 years later, their names are still being spoken aloud by people who never met them. That is what faith does. It inserts your small, fragile, temporary life into an eternal narrative. You become part of something that will not end when your body fails. Abel has been dead for thousands of years, and he still speaks. You will die, too. But if your faith is in Christ, your story does not end at the grave. It continues, carried forward by every person who comes after you, until the day the race is finally finished, and the cloud of witnesses comes down from the stands and joins the runners on the field. The people in Hebrews 11 did not receive what was promised, but we know what the promise was, and we know it was kept. Christ came. Christ died. Christ rose. And because he rose, every person in that chapter, every person in that cloud of witnesses, every person who has ever trusted the God they could not see, will one day rise too. That is Hebrews 11, not a list of heroes, a courtroom, a case built across millennia with the most unlikely witnesses imaginable, and the verdict, written in the blood of Christ and sealed by an empty tomb, is that faith wins. Not because the faithful always survive, but because the one they trust already has. If you want to see how this story reaches its climax in the book of Revelation, when the cloud of witnesses finally meets the Lamb face to face, that video is on screen right now. I will see you there.